as Donald Trump's catastrophic and unlawful war in Iran was exposed for what it was, as the American people saw how horrific Donald Trump and his regime were acting. I mean, most of it was coming from Donald Trump's own social media post, obliterating civilizations, using expletives to open the effing strait or else we'll demolish you. I mean, threatening genocide on social media platforms, and then blowing up elementary schools and killing little girls. There's also a lot that we don't know, and this is why the press is so critical and plays such an important function. And reporters at the Pentagon historically are these veteran reporters who know this area at a very meticulous level, and in the past lots of important stories and holding the Pentagon and our military industrial complex accountable came from these reporters. And obviously one of the first things that authoritarian regimes attempt to do is destroy the free press. And one of the areas that they targeted amongst all these other areas, were defense reporters. And a very feeble, weak little man named Pete Hegseth, who's the Department of Defense secretary, who calls himself a Department of War secretary, unlawfully instituted a lot of policies to try to block the press from gaining access to him, to gaining access within the Pentagon building itself, from attending meaningfully press conferences, and from being able to report from the Pentagon unless you submitted your stories essentially for approval to a team controlled by Pete Hegseth for them to review. Now, Hegseth started going down this path by saying, look, this is about national security, and it's the press has too free access to show up to like where the defense secretary is located and by our room, and and they shouldn't just be walking around the building, so we need to limit the mobility of them. And then it went from limiting the mobility of the press to what the ultimate intention was, which is just basically kicking out the press from the Pentagon and then bringing in people like Mike Lindell and Laura Loomer and these far right-wing extremist influencers. And so members of the press challenged these policies that were put forward by Hex as a violation of the First Amendment. Obviously, there are national security issues where there could be a balance between the First Amendment and national security issues, but the First Amendment is the first of the amendments in the Constitution for a reason. And the Pentagon is a federal building, and there's no right to ban reporters from reporting truthfully within the Pentagon outside very limited exceptions. Obviously classified, highly classified information, and certain security issues, but you can't use that to cover all this other, valid, legitimate, important First Amendment but reporting that the press does. So about March 20th, a judge by the name of Judge Friedman in Washington, D.C., issued an order after a lawsuit was filed by members of the press and said, the press wins. They get their access back. You can't ban them. All of these limitations that you're providing and claiming, well, we're not excluding them. They just have to go through these, these hoops and ladders. What you set up was a system that effectively banned them because it requires your approval over their reporting. They have to sign a pledge that they'll be loyal to you, and no one's going to sign that pledge if they're going to maintain their independence as a reporter. Nobody signed it, whether it was Fox or Wall Street Journal or Washington Post or New York Times. The only people who signed it were the right-wing extremist influencers who came in and took the place of like the real defense reporters. So the reporters win the lawsuit, and then a few days later, Pete Hegseth implements a new plan and policy and says, okay, well, now we basically have escorts and chaperones who need to be with you in the building, and you have to go through these hoops and hurdles. So he sets up a whole new system of new hoops and hurdles and says, okay, the judge ruled that we can't do these hoops and hurdles, so we're putting in these hoops and hurdles, and I guess you're going to have to sue us again. And that takes a long time, filing a whole new lawsuit. So what the reporters did, rather than filing a whole new lawsuit, they filed a motion for compliance with the court's prior order. And they said, hey, judge, you made this ruling that we get our access back and we could report on things like the war or other topics that defense reporters talk about. And now rather than making us sign Pledge A of loyalty, we have to do Pledge B of loyalty. And it's basically just changing it slightly to try to avoid your order. And the judge was like, yeah, that's basically what act would happen. And the judge in this order said, the court cannot conclude this opinion without noticing once again what this case is really about. The attempt by the Secretary of Defense to dictate the information received by the American people, to control the message that the public hears and sees only what the Secretary and the Trump administration want them to hear and see. The Constitution demands better. The American public demands better too. Over the past few weeks, the court has received dozens of letters and postcards from people across the country explaining what the First Amendment means to them. To quote one such letter, "A free press is essential to the success of our democratic republic. The people are the government, and they cannot make good, well-informed choices without all the facts. A free press is an excellent place to start. The protection of freedom enshrined in the First Amendment is a fundamental principle of American government. The First Amendment means that government has no power to thwart the process of free discussion, to abridge the freedoms necessary to make that process work. With the issuance of the interim policy, the department has invoked slightly different language to achieve the same unconstitutional result. The curtailment of First Amendment rights is dangerous at any time, and even more so in a time of war. Suppression of political speech is the mark of autocracy, not democracy, as the framers recognized when they drafted the First Amendment. I want to bring in Harry Litman from the Talking Feds YouTube channel and Talking Feds Subsect. Now, Harry, I was reading a story the other day where the US Embassy in Baghdad in Iraq basically posted, "We are condemning the fact that there was a terrorist attack on people in the embassy, and we have summoned the Iraqi government to ask them why are you not, disciplining or controlling the Shiite militia groups." And when people read that, when I read that, I was like, wait a minute, there was a terrorist attack on our building, and why I didn't know about that. That's kind of a big story. Like, what's happening here? Harry, those two purported F-15E pilots who were shot out of the sky, and then some story was told of hundreds of special forces near the Isfahan nuclear base were there to rescue these two F-15E pilots. That's the Trump regime's version of events. But as I pointed out, you had two C-130s, hundreds of special forces. Wouldn't you be bringing more attention to the two F-15E pilots rather than just bringing in one or two people and a quick helicopter? So when I hear stories like that, I don't want to get conspiratorial, Harry, and say, oh, it's not two F-15E pilots. Maybe this was basically subterfuge for a broader mission to try to get uranium from the Isfahan facility. I don't know. Because this regime lies about everything. They want to take out the reporters, and those are two stories that I just mentioned, where having reporters inside the Pentagon make all the difference in the world, right? So break it down for us, Harry. What a big deal. Well, first, Ben, get conspiratorial, because War Secretary Pete Hegseth has shown himself not simply willing, but eager to absolutely shape the story. Remember, he's the guy who banned photographers because they didn't think they were flattering enough of his War Secretary countenance. He's absolutely, it's the old book from Otto Gray's, Just Try to Control Things During Wartime. So, excuse me. Don't hold back. Look, the first effort was outrageous in and of itself for the reasons Freridman broke down, for trying to restrict access to right-minded reporters, for trying to keep stories from getting to the American people, from trying to make it a crime to do what reporters do every day, which is ferret out information from sources. It's the bane of agencies, but that's exactly how things work in Washington. This one was doubly outrageous because it did the exact same things, but in a ham-handed way, tried to somehow pull one over on the judge by somehow, paraphrasing a little and doing this or that. And Freridman, who is a sharp cookie, was having none of it. He went through methodically, but he had, as you say, different points in the opinion that showed, one, you got to be kidding me, and two, the stakes here are grand. So he begins the opinion with the first words of the opinion are the words of the First Amendment, and then a long P onto it from the absolutist First Amendment joistist Hugo Black, and it goes from there. But when he cuts to the chase, he says, this is like quite obviously just a way to get around my other order. It's exactly what you're trying to do. And in sort of concrete terms, they were going to very much restrict access. Here's a little corridor that reporters can stay in, and we have to escort them anywhere else. And even more perniciously, basically make it a crime to get a scoop, to get a story on the grounds that you are somehow aiding and abetting the violation by the employee who's giving you this information. If that were so, all kinds of coverage of government would simply be shut down. So Friedman was, on the one hand, methodical, analytical, sort of unfazed, but on the other, had a real tone of, you guys are really trying to, pull the wool over my eyes. I wasn't boring yesterday. And by the way, even in the interim order that they did these new measures, they said, we think Friedman got it wrong. And so Friedman says, look, it's okay if I make an order for you to do something new, to adhere to it. What's not okay is for you to just, do the same thing and dress it up a little bit. Go ahead and try your luck, as they're going to try to do, I think, at the DC circuit. See if you can get it reversed. But Friedman in particular has made a very strong record that this is really fundamental stuff, and that the wartime context only makes it more exigent that we find out about these things. Just a quick comment on your two stories. You're right, we don't have them. That rescue of that second guy in with the pilot, we hear that there were hundreds of people combing the land, the countryside. He was just somewhere in a cave with a phone, but that somehow the CIA was able to figure it out and pass that info on to the Pentagon. Actually, it sounds sort of heroic to me, but we really don't know what the hell happened. And when we don't know with this administration what the hell happened, your first suspicion is they don't want you to know because it doesn't look so good for them. And that's, precisely what the First Amendment forbids. You got to take your medicine. It is the First Amendment after all. So Friedman showed himself to be a very strong steward of it. He's very well resected across the aisle. Up at the DC circuit, they'll scream emergency about, we have to be able to control the message. But what's the reason that you have to be able to control the message? Especially in wartime, because Pete Hegseth wants it to, and he doesn't like the way the pictures have portrayed him. That shouldn't cut it. So we'll see what emergency they scream going up. But I think it's pretty clear they've burnt all bridges with senior Judge Paul Freire-Dedman, who sees their efforts for what they are. I mean, one of the things is to have like an escort, right? I mean, a monitor. I mean, just think about how Orwellian that is. You're a reporter, let's say you're working at, a veteran reporter for 20, 30 years, right? A lot of these defense reporters have long done that job, and it's a very actually non-partisan job. Like even the Fox defense reporters are fairly, they stick with the facts more, Don't get me wrong, we call out the propaganda for what it is generally. They lean certain ways and they withhold information, usually to be helpful to the Pentagon. Generally, all but just think of it. You're a reporter. You show up and you're like, hey, we have a monitor, and it's like one of these little Doge big ball kids, like they throw some 21-year-old intern who you show up. That's what it's like, and the person looks at you and like shadows you like a defender guarding a basketball player. And that was what basically one of the things that they were going to do. Manto Man, no zone in the Pentagon, right? Like the image I gave you of little big balls following, a 30-year-old reporter around. Well, on that note, everybody subscribe to Harry. I just say but I just want to say really quickly that it's not only bad in of itself, but we have a president who, this very war-ben. We've had 7 different reasons for what's going on. We've had credible reports just this week that they're playing fast and loose with the ceasefire. In any war, it's important for the American people to know, but in this war and this commander-in-chief and this war secretary, it's really exigent. It is a big public policy issue. People are against this war. They more than even normally deserve to know the goddamn facts that they have yet to be provided. Everybody hit subscribe to our channel, but more importantly, Harry's channel. Subscribe right now to the Talking Feds YouTube channel, Talking Feds Substack, Talking Feds podcast. Thanks, Harry. Thank you, Van. Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.